Behold, my glorious supporter Scoom Slayer has requested some discussion about parallel. First, we need to talk about parallel universes. Now, we're not doing that. Scoom Slayer asks, what if you somehow found yourself in a parallel universe with only some very minor difference, and you didn't find out for years? For example, in this reality, the Titanic just didn't sink, something like that. There are a lot of potential responses to this. The very first thing I want to say is I'm not sure I agree that that is possible. So, for example, let's imagine a reality where the Titanic just didn't sink. That would not... I don't think you would expect that to lead to, like, today being only a little different from how it is now. You see what I'm saying? As long as the minor difference between this parallel universe and where I came from happened like not very recently, I don't think there's any likely chance that the universe is not very different. Like, you'd probably know, you know what I mean? You might not know what the change was, but you'd wake up and everything would be like pretty different, you would think, you know, because of the butterfly effect. So, for example, there are quite a few, I don't know why I found so many fantasy stories like this, but I've read a lot of fantasy about the Hindenburg didn't explode. So airships like blimps or, you know, big airships like that are much more popular than they currently are. I'm not sure I agree that that would happen, but it would be different. You see what I'm trying to say? Like, certainly people would, if anything, probably use airships more than we do nowadays. It's possible that the Hindenburg disaster prevented an even larger disaster, so maybe you'd end up in a world with a different, like, even less blimps or whatever. But you see my point. It's pretty unimaginable that that relatively small change in history would not lead to a very different history, provided it didn't happen quite recently, because the butterfly effect would make it trickle out to a lot of stuff. It's even possible that extremely minor changes, like in the woods behind my apartment 5 years ago, a deer died instead of living. That might not massively change causality, but there's a good chance it would somehow. Like, the body goes into a river, and because it died, it gets washed away by a flood. There can be extreme weather here sometimes, and it goes in the river. And I wouldn't currently have any way to know this, but unbeknownst to everybody else, a year later, a couple will propose next to that river. But during the proposal, one member of the couple will look into the river and see the deer skull or something. I did actually find a deer skull in this river. That's where this example is coming from, but it doesn't really matter. And something about that will dissuade them or make them want to commit to the proposal. Maybe they were going to say no, but looking at the deer's skull evokes their mortality subconsciously, and they decide to get married because they want to have that secure life. But it was a bad idea to get married, and this ends up making that person not become like a relatively prominent scientist or something, and they get tied up in their crappy marriage because they committed to it when they really knew they shouldn't have. And so some major discovery along the line doesn't happen. Even a relatively minor change like that, provided it is not extremely recent, should have like pretty noticeable consequences, even if it seems like something that like definitely does not matter. You know what I mean? Unless, if there's like any major agent around to see it, it probably will change the future a lot in some unpredictable way. So my first response is, unless the thing that changes is very recent, I think it would be extremely easy to find out that things were different. From my perspective, I'm in the different parallel universe. Causality I will very quickly discover that from my frame of reference, causality doesn't make sense anymore. So the whole premise of the question that I found myself in a parallel universe and there's only some very minor difference and I didn't find out for years is impossible, as far as I know. There's a flip side to this, so I'll cover that first, and then we'll get into it a little bit more. Maybe, surprisingly, this actually is very possible. I don't really see how that would be the case logically, but it's possible that the nature of causality is actually more based on sort of deterministic decision points, or like check marks. There's a concept that I think about a lot in my spare time called the law of the vital few, or the rule of the vital few. And this is the idea that in a sort of societal or social engineering sense, most people don't affect change. It's really a few people that are the agents of that change. Let me give you an example if that sounds silly. For most people, voting is a matter of, them being acted upon by forces. If there's enough of a political campaign, or the situation in the country is like bad enough or something, they'll be compelled to vote. And whether or not that compels Joe Schmo over there to vote basically determines whether most other people are compelled to vote, because the same forces determine whether almost all of those people vote. Now, for a few people in this society, they may or may not vote for a reason that is irrelevant to everybody else. Their vote really doesn't matter because they're motivated by things that really only motivate them. The point I'm trying to make is that because most members of a society probably will be motivated by this same factor, the one guy who is in charge of making that one political ad, the director for that one political ad, actually influenced like pretty much the whole election. It's just unclear how they influenced it, but certainly from above, from way back, or in hindsight, it can be very clear that actually that one guy pretty much decided the entire fate of the country. They were the vital agent, if you will. I don't remember what it's actually called. Maybe it's called that. But that's the concept. You could also turn around and argue that some of us who maybe weren't motivated by that, we might in some way be the vital few for a situation, in that, let's say we're the ones who, whether we vote or not is irrelevant, but we're freed up to produce an unusual approach to the discussion about voting, and that might end up being novel and influencing a bunch of people. Maybe we are the director, and that one director who's influencing how a bunch of people votes, whether they actually vote or not is completely irrelevant, because what influences other people to vote will not likely be what influences them. And so they are, that's likely. The people that are not universally influenced, it's reasonably likely that they are the people influencing all those other people, making them the sort of vital agent that decides that thing. You could take this concept and apply it to this idea we're talking about. In the beginning of my answer to this question, I said that finding yourself in a parallel universe with only some minor difference that didn't happen like very recently, and not finding out for years, is basically impossible, because of the nature of the butterfly effect. You would expect that the world would be really different even with only a minor change, provided that it's able to affect basically anything. Because I would argue, with our current understanding, that is a logical way to assume that's how causality works. But maybe it isn't. Maybe that it's hard to tell from our perspective. But there's actually sort of a vital few of causality, too. Let me explain an example. Just like the voting thing before, maybe that deer going into the river was going to be irrelevant, because no matter what ends up in that river, every winter, a certain group of wolves that lives in the woods back there eats everything in the river. Like they'll gnaw on all the bones, or they'll take all of them out. And if they don't, they'll just go eat something else. That deer was going to die that winter. And the fact that it died earlier and was then in the river maybe changed the amount of food the wolves had by some amount. But there's really no way to know, but maybe it turns out that didn't really matter. Maybe causality is a combination of those, or maybe it's hard to tell, but it actually swings rather heavily in one or the other direction, the butterfly effect or the sort of vital few of causality. And if it does swing heavily in the direction of the sort of vital few thing, this means that it's actually rather difficult to change history. You need to change a very key event to have a large enough effect that can't be compensated for by, just like things doing things relatively randomly. Nature will cover up a lot of the irregularities. So you need to do something big enough. You need to change something big enough that the way the world was already going doesn't just cover it up. And it's possible then that you could change something relatively minor, but not that minor to some people, like the Titanic sinking or the Hindenburg thing or whatever. I'm not sure I agree that's minor. I talked about that before, but whatever, maybe it is possible for an event like that to not change causality that much. I would be surprised if that was possible, but it might be that way. It might be that you need to do something pretty major or things don't change. It might be that, surprisingly, something like Abraham Lincoln not being, was he assassinated? Anyway, I don't know. I don't know my history at all, so this is a tough question for me. Doesn't actually change much. You would expect that it would, but even if you don't know how, you might be thinking, well, who really cares, right? Someone else will take their place. But there are subtle differences that add up. That's the concept of the butterfly effect. But maybe not. Maybe that isn't generally how causality goes. Or maybe it's a mix of the two. Who knows? Anyway, I think it is rather unlikely that a relatively minor change that, again, isn't very recent would produce a reality that would not be very easy to recognize as different. And I'll tell you, because I'm the kind of person who thinks about stuff like this all the time, I think I in particular would particularly quickly notice. And one of my first guesses would be, I guess I swapped to a different timeline or something. Like, it wouldn't take me very long to think, oh, I'm not just crazy. I think that's what a lot of people would assume. I would probably quickly think, either I'm having a new type of dream I haven't had before, I've been living in a simulation all along, or for some reason I swapped timelines. Like, that's pretty much if I can ever discover why I'm here instead of where I was, those are probably the reasons. It's probably one of those things. Maybe I was kidnapped and I'm part of a brain study where they're probing my brain or something, but probably not. The odds that they chose me, why? So it's probably one of those three things. And so you said, what would you do? What if this thing? How would you feel? Well, there are a lot of places to go from here. Yeah, I mean, again, we're closing the door on that thing about how is it even possible that I didn't find out for years? But let's just assume, however it happened, I didn't find out for years. It's possible. Maybe the change was really big, but it's in some other part of the world I don't know about that much. I am not very up in my history, so it's possible, certainly. I do think, again, it would be unlikely to cause, we have a global society, like a big change. But anyway, I'll stop talking about that part now. What are the consequences? Well, I'll tell you pretty much the first thing I thought of, which is that to me, it would be of great significance and great excitement that it is possible to travel to a parallel universe in the first place, whether it is because I'm having some crazy new type of dream, or because I'm living in a simulation, or because I somehow travel to a parallel universe. I, the kind of person I am, would be very, very happy. I don't want to leave the life that I'm currently living, but the idea that there is this element of reality, there's a good chance that it extends my lifespan or conscious lifespan, and or that, like, you could travel to another parallel universe, are all some of the best possible things you could tell me as a person. So I would be very, very happy, at least at first. And then I think I would think about this. Are the people that I cared about before the same people that I've been living with here, thinking we're the same people? In other words, Anna, my girlfriend, my really close friend Chelsea, my longest time friend Sierra, Anna's, my girlfriend's brother Hank, some of the closest people to me, my really long time friend Steven. Are they the same people in a meaningful way? I feel the same way about them because until recently, I apparently didn't know that I'm in a parallel universe. But they are, as far as I know, effectively different instances of those people. Do I like them? You know what I mean? It's a little creepy, or maybe it doesn't really matter, I think something really interesting about this would be to, I'll tell you, I would immediately tell at least a few of those people I just named that I had this experience. And they would probably be pretty alarmed and maybe be worried about my health, but they would probably believe me and say, at the very least, you have clearly had an extremely unusual experience. And much like the response I would have, I know a lot of my close friends would respond by saying, yeah, I mean, obviously it's not easy to completely believe you, but you have at the very least almost certainly had a genuinely flustering or disorienting experience. For example, I already get dreams that last days most of the time. When I go to bed, usually from my frame of reference, I'm asleep for like several entire days and then I wake up. So it wouldn't be that hard of a pill to swallow for a lot of the people in my personal life for me to tell them that from my frame of reference, this is not the same world I came from. They would probably say, like, okay, you know, I don't, it's hard to believe that you like spatial travel is possible that way. But that's really weird, you know? And if I told them, like, I have to decide whether I feel like you are really the same person, like, they might be upset because it feels like I'm not the person they knew or something. Also, who did they know? Am I replacing myself? Did from their frame of reference, do I just suddenly change my attitude about them? You know, that's another weird thing. What happened to me in the other world? Do I just continue? You know what I mean? Are there two of my consciousness and then one of them kind of jumps over? So now they're both my consciousness, but this one is confused because it didn't come from here. You know, causality appears to break from this copy of my consciousness's perspective, but this one in the place I came from is just still going, you know? Did it duplicate my consciousness? Or is there now a world where everybody thinks I'm dead or I'm in a coma or something? I just spontaneously exploded or disappeared or fell into a coma. I might worry about that and want to go back to where I came from. I would certainly think for the rest of my life about how I could possibly explore this phenomena without being treated like I'm crazy or as a test subject. For example, I can't simply go to a prominent scientist and tell them, because they'll either put me in an insane asylum or turn me into a lab. I'll be kidnapped in the dead of night and turned into a lab rat. So what do I do? You know, maybe I would start a YouTube channel where I surreptitiously create a false alter ego named Scoomslayer to ask myself this question. And then I would tell people, you know what I mean? You might do some extremely convoluted scheme to somehow alert people. That wouldn't alert. This is not alerting people. I didn't, by the way. Unfortunate. As much as I wish I had, believe me, I wish I had. I would love to tell you, but as far as I know anyway, I didn't. It does haunt me, this phrase, the little death of sleep. What if we swap back and forth between them pretty frequently, and they are just really similar? You know, what if this does happen? A thought experiment that I had previously was, you know, what if in a moment you close your eyes, you get hit by a sniper for some reason and die, but in the moment of your death, as your life flashes before your eyes, if that would even happen when you die this way, or you die in a way where it does happen, what if your mind does the time dilation thing that I experience when I dream, and you appear to feel no change, and your brain is actually super time dilating, simulating your life continuing, even though you are, you know, in real time, basically dead or extremely imminently about to die. Maybe we already did die somewhere along the line and our brain is just keeping the tape reel going. You know what I mean? Maybe this is that, I would think to myself. Maybe I'm dead. Maybe this is what happens when you die. I think something I would strongly consider is the possibility that, like, this is how the afterlife works or something, where if you on one of the infinite timelines dies, your consciousness gets shunted over to an equivalent one as a way to sort of reconcile. I don't know why, but like maybe that is what happens for some reason. Yeah, I would start rapidly believing more in a life like after death, or at least being more interested in that subject, which at the moment I feel like there's no good evidence that anything happens. That's a thought I would have. What else did I write in my notes? I got a lot of the things I wrote in my notes when I talked about it again. Yeah, I mean, a note I wrote was that there is a lot of significance to this beyond the actual difference in the world. I think that, like, the world itself being different is sort of neither here nor there to my response, and it would be more about, like, wow, that's a thing that can even happen, is, like, pretty remarkable and likely worthy of action in some way. Like, there's probably something... It probably makes sense to perform some action that I would not otherwise have performed now that I know that information. I'm sure that not soon afterward, but after a few months or years, maybe only a few days, I would begin to deeply self-doubt, or perhaps I would come to the opinion that it is something to open my mind to the possibility of, but not take too seriously. I just said it may be worth taking an action I wouldn't have otherwise taken, but I'm not sure it would warrant acting too differently. If you told me right now, we are for sure living in a simulation. We are for sure living in a simulation. I would kind of be like, yeah, you know, like I would have given it about a 33% chance anyway. Meh, you know, it doesn't warrant changing my course of action at all, really. There is almost certainly absolutely nothing I can do about that. So who cares, if I did find a way to feel basically sure, I would think that was remarkable. It's possible, I would think, that means I have a relatively direct line to the people running the simulation, which means I might be able to find some way to continue on after I die, am not simulated anymore. If I can convince them that I am interesting enough, worthy of attention enough, what I would probably do if I felt I had confirmed that we were living in a simulation, would be to try to figure out what the simulation is for and become the epitome of that. For example, if I thought that it was a kind of a degradation of society thing, I might become an absolutely horrid mass murderer because this is all a simulation, and I now only care about continuing on after it ends. In the context of the infinite, I no longer care about this simulated existence that I'm in, and I just want to continue on. If I thought that there was a way to live forever and it required me to do that, I would consider doing it. If that makes me an immoral monster, I don't know what to tell you. But I don't know how I would be sure. You know what I mean? It wouldn't just be like a voice from the heavens is like, it's true, you are, or like, believe me. Like, I would think that was some weird technology or something, or that I was hallucinating. I wouldn't believe that. I'm not sure what would have to happen for me to feel like, look, you for sure are living in a situation. God damn it. I think this is the end of this question. But that's most of what I would think. I think the living in a simulation thing feels pretty likely if that happened, that I kind of swapped over to one. I'll be honest with you, I think I would have a little bit of a big head about it. It doesn't seem that anybody else around me has experienced this. Or to put it a different way, while it would be difficult to convince people in your new reality that you didn't come from that one, you came from a different one, I don't think that nobody would try to do that. You know what I mean? Like, you would expect to see a decent number of people trying to convince the world that they were from there. And again, in the world we currently live in, occasionally you hear really crazy people claim they're from somewhere else, but they simply don't have any evidence whatsoever to back that up. Again, I'm not talking about physical evidence. What I mean is, I don't really believe that people going through the thought process I'm going through would approach the matter that way. There's just no point. You know what I mean? It's you have to be an idiot to think that there is any point in like yelling that you're totally from somewhere else. Like, no one is going to believe you, you idiot. You would do it with more tact like that. And I simply do not see any results of anyone trying to do that, I think you would. I don't think you'd see places like Area 51 and whatever. You would see people that had ideas that didn't seem like they were from here a lot. Or, like, let me give you an example. Maybe in this place where the Hindenburg didn't explode or whatever, there was a bunch of airships. And so you'd have someone who traveled from there to here who would be like mysteriously advocating airships beyond what it seems obvious to do in our current society, and explaining quite logically that they actually are really efficient and the risks are kind of worth it, And they would own a small company that they would have put together where they made airships. But major things like that could really influence society, I don't know, maybe that does happen, but I kind of feel like it doesn't. Maybe you would expect a lot of entrepreneurs, which is maybe what we have. That's a thought, but you see what I'm trying to say. I am unconvinced that there is clear evidence that this thing where I switched universes is happening to much of anybody else, which would probably lead to me feeling rather self-absorbed and thinking, why ever this happened, there must be something special about me for that to have happened to me, because it doesn't appear to be happening to at least not most other people. So what gives, you know? If it's how death works, wouldn't a bunch of people be feeling that way? But they clearly aren't. Not most people, you know? You see what I'm trying to say? So I don't know. Like maybe, but I really don't think so. So that would be interesting. That would feel of note. I think that's most of what I have to say. It's a fun concept. I like this kind of thing. If you can't tell, I think about this or something similar to it rather a lot already. This is one of the really easy kind of parlay where I talk about this even without being prompted to, on the regular, like pretty regularly. As you can tell from many parlay answers I've given before, I really, really, really don't want to die. So thinking about how things might go is of note to me, rather than just staring at the ceiling and being depressed as the existential dread crushes me like a bug. You might as well try to think about maybe how I can get out of it, or maybe things are not what they appear in the first place. It's possible we're of very little significance as far as we know, so who knows, maybe there is some huge different thing other than what we expect going on. It's worthy of a little bit of thinking, so I appreciate the invitation to do that thinking in public. Can't hurt.